morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone around the world. This is Georgie Stripping the Dipping Season 4, and today we have a guest who's been instrumental in revolutionizing motorsport media. In the fast-paced world of motorsport journalism, his tenure as editor-in-chief at Autosport to co-founding the race in 2020, this person has been at the forefront of delivering cutting-edge motorsport content. Under his leadership, the race media has rapidly become a leading voice in the industry, acquiring platforms like WTF1, DriverDB, and launching initiatives such as the Race Media Awards. This is none other than Andrew Vanderbilt. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
How are you today, and how are you feeling after the season starts?
No, I'm very well. It's a rare sunny day in London, so I've been enjoying that. And really good way for Formula One season to start. A brilliantly unpredictable race with a great result, and hopefully we're going to have 23 more of those.
Okay, so for those who are not familiar with who you are, please tell who is Andrew Vanderbilt?
Yeah, it's probably the hardest question ever to be asked, really, is who or what you are. But for shorthand, yeah, I'm the founder and CEO of the Race Media. I've been a motorsport journalist for more than 25 years now. I worked for the Jaguar Racing Formula One team when they came in the early 2000s. And from there, I got to work at Autosport, where I ended up being the editor and editor-in-chief for the best part of a decade. After that, I was one of the original launch team at Formula E, where I did the first 3 and a bit seasons before going to the Motorsport Network, where I was editorial director. And then after that, I left in late 2019, and in early 2020, we launched the race. So in a really, really quick overview, that's a little bit about what I am. But I've written books. Sorry?
That's a huge resume. Nobody can compete with that.
Yeah, there's probably not too many people that have done all of that. It's been a long time, but it's also gone by incredibly quickly. I've been really fortunate enough to have travelled the world. Over that period of time, I've interviewed all the living world champions that were effectively around in the period in which I've operated, and yeah, it's been an amazing time, and I've been incredibly fortunate enough to have enjoyed this fabulous lifestyle.
Okay, so let's go back to the beginning of this lifestyle. What's your first motorsport memory that led you into this path?
So I grew up in a place called Bristol, which is in the west of the UK. And in those early days, in the late 70s and early 80s, there was 2 really big forms of motorsport there. So we used to have a speedway team called the Bristol Bulldogs, and I remember going to see that with my parents as a small child and just loving the sound and the noise. And we also used to be the home to the British Powerboat Grand Prix in the docks down in Bristol Centre, which was the fastest and most dangerous track on the calendar at the time, and just being completely enraptured by the speed of the boats going around there. So I've loved cars for as long as I can remember, and I particularly like watching things that go fast. So being able to do all of that has been, yeah, a really lucky thing to be able to make a living out of.
Out of that, how did you actually get into the career? Saying that, okay, you know what, this is where I should start as a career. Were you planning to be in the media side from the beginning itself for motorsport?
Well, there's a sort of funny story about this, and that when I had to speak to the careers teacher when you're sort of 13, 14 at school, I said I wanted to be the editor of Autosport. But at the time, it didn't really feel like a feasible thing. There'd been more people that had walked on the surface of the moon than had edited that magazine at the time. And I did a politics degree, and I spent some time trying to establish a career on that side of things, and really didn't think that this was going to be something that I ended up doing for quite a long time.
That's quite the journey. I mean, from politics to get into four-wheel journeys, that's a remarkable shift.
Yeah, I having sort of stumbled around and not really be able to find what I wanted to do. I did a postgraduate journalism course degree, MVQ level degree at the place called the Journalism Training Centre, which is how I ended up moving to London. And from there, I really wanted to be a serious, proper journalist. And the timing was really bad. It was one of those sort of late 90s recessions were on and there weren't many jobs. But ultimately, it's easier to write about things that you love and that you know about. And I knew a lot about motorsport, and eventually that was how I was able to find my way in. And if you really are passionate about something, then I think it's quite easy to excel. And it turned out actually I was quite good at it.
Okay, so let's talk about something that you're actually passionate about, founding the race. In February 2020, you founded the race as a digital only motorsport channel. What motivated you to start this venture and what sort of challenges did you face during its inception?
So after I went back to the Motorsport Network, basically this company had been established that had bought up um, dozens of independent motorsport publishers around the world, and ultimately the motorsport division of Haymarket, which published Autosport, Motorsport News, and F1 Racing as it was. And I was enticed to go back there from the job I had at Formula E, which I was enjoying very much at the time. Um, and safe to say, I couldn't make it work. I couldn't bring all the bits together. I neither had the power or influence or the means to actually make this work. But I knew I could. I knew that it was possible to make all of this work. And by a series of incredible coincidences, the opportunity came around to get the investment together that was needed to create the race. And it was both simultaneously incredibly unfortunate and incredibly fortunate that we launched in February 2020, about 3 weeks before the pandemic hit and all global motorsport was cancelled. So this could have been, and in many ways, possibly should have been the end of us. I remember distinctly about 2 months in clicking on the Google Analytics and seeing how many people were visiting the website at the time. And I was convinced, well, I knew that we were employing more people than were visiting the website at that moment. And to try and feed that back to an investor when there was seemingly no end to the lockdown at the time would have been a very difficult sell. But my co-founder, Darren Cox, while we were in Australia trying to launch the race at the 2020 Australian Grand Prix, after it became clear that it was going to be cancelled, he pulled a lot of strings together, and on that Sunday evening, we launched the first of our All-Star Esports series. And on that weekend, that Sunday evening, when the Grand Prix should have taken place in the morning, we had a live esport event that had people like Max Verstappen and Felix Rosenqvist and a lot of prominent esport gamers. And for 15 of the next 16 weekends, we did this live. Firstly on our own YouTube channel, then on ESPN and also on Eurosport. And by the end of it, we had 3 different races, one for current racing drivers, one for current sim racers, and one called the Legends Trophy, which meant I was part of the greatest WhatsApp group that's ever existed with people like Fernando Alonso and Jenson Button and Dario Franchitti and Mario Andretti and Emerson Fittipaldi and all of these
Lucky
amazing
hell.
yeah, all of these amazing characters from the history of motorsport, and they were there playing on computer games to a live TV audience and a live streaming audience, and that meant we'd showcased that we were nimble and agile and a legacy-free business that we had set out to be, and that we could turn our hands to doing anything. And at a time when there was nothing, we became one of the main things that was on. And when motorsport and Formula One did an amazing job during lockdown, and when Formula One came back out of it, we pivoted immediately back to doing what we were set up to do, and we just saw that there was this enormous appetite for the content that we were creating, and it's been an amazing upward journey ever since. Yeah, so I mentioned Darren earlier. So he and I founded the race together. So he was CEO and I was COO. I mean, I had a lot of different job titles, but that was the one we ultimately settled on. He left to pursue other interests, and uh, the role, obviously somebody needed to perform that role, and it was felt that I was sort of the obvious person to do it. The main difference from what I was doing before um, was that I was then in direct contact with the various investors and people who were backing us, and having to manage upwards as well as outwards. I'd always been effectively responsible for implementing the vision of what the business was, making sure that we were one step ahead of what the our opposition might be doing, and come up with interesting and cool ideas. And the becoming CEO meant that I'd have to go and explain myself as well as just coming up with ideas. I'd have to go and sell them into the investors and get the funding to do that. Whereas previously, I was slightly shielded from that, and all I had to do was sort of exercise my brain into thinking what could be done, rather than having to work out exactly how we were going to pay for it. I'd say that actually that probably happened a lot earlier than that, really. When I took over as the magazine editor, I think that was in late 2005. It might have been early too, I can't remember exactly. It was already clear that the world of media consumption was changing, and that the number of people buying magazines, while they would occasionally go up on a weekly basis, the overall trend was down. Whereas we had a website where, I mean, measuring traffic back then was pretty rudimentary and unreliable, but it was clear that it was much easier for somebody to click on a web browser and access your story than it was to go to a supermarket or a newsagent and buy the magazine. And so it had always been very clear to me that the future was digital. But when you're in a legacy business that's been printing and selling magazines for more than 50 years, the business is effectively designed, set up, and steeped in that world. You know, some of the job titles and the stratas that existed only make sense in a world of physical media publishing. They don't make sense in a digital world. And there are people who um, don't like change, who potentially and rightly fear for their role in a changing world. And so there has always been resistance. And some of that resistance makes sense, right? When you buy a magazine, you're paying however much it is for it, and that gives you a guaranteed level of income. When you click on a web browser and you open a story, what's that? Nothing really. If you look at the programmatic ad rates against it, it doesn't even come close to replacing the funding and the income you would get from actually selling physical magazines. So it required a completely different outlook into the way that the business is structured, and particularly the way they're financed. And it requires someone with vision and courage to really get behind that. And uh, it needed a fresh perspective on it to really see that through to its proper conclusion. Yeah, it was incredibly exciting. So I'd known Alejandro Agag, the founder and CEO of Formula E, for a few years, since he entered the GP2 series along when he bought into Adrian Campos's team. And we'd been quite close. I'd always gotten well with him. I liked the way he went about his business. And when the Formula E came up and he started getting some really serious people involved, I thought this seems like an exciting new opportunity. So I think I was staff member number 14. When we joined, we were in a very small office in Hammersmith. If you look at the building and the size of the place they're in now, it's only a couple of 100 meters away, but it's on a completely different scale to the place we were when I started. And there's probably more than 200 people there now. It's grown unbelievably. But it was the great thing was that there was no precedent for any of this. There was nothing. It was just, what can you do with the assets that we got? And at the time, there was one render of the car. There was a video of it doing a donut with Lucas Degrassi driving it in a car park in Vegas, and that was about it. And I had to somehow come in with a strategy that was going to persuade people that this was cool and interesting and exciting and something they should engage in. And that meant really testing your creativity and ways in which you can turn effectively nothing into something. It was different once we'd had a race and there were other assets, but that early period, the first 6 months when I was there was effectively nothing. And conjuring something out of nothing is, yeah, a really interesting challenge. And then there was a lot of naysayers and people around it to begin with, a lot of people who were just simply anti-electric car, and also a lot of people who were obviously cynical because there'd been things like A1 GP and Super League Formula before that had come and made a lot of noise and then disappeared really quickly. And why was this going to be any different? And it was a bit of a punt on all of us who were there in those early days that this was going to be something different. But it just felt like, with the timing and with the people that were on board, that maybe this did have the opportunity and the ability to really cut through and sustain itself. And that's proven to be the case. I think it faces some more challenges now. When we started, the whole idea was to make electric cars sexy. Right before then, there was like G Whizzes and Renault Zoes and these small little family cars that maybe had a range of about 70 miles, and electric cars weren't seen as being a viable thing to buy. Now, of course, every supercar in the world has got 2,000 horsepower and all-wheel drive, and they're all electric, and they're unbelievably quick and brilliant. And there's some really cool stuff, especially coming out of China at the moment, of what electric cars are. So the role of Formula E in that, I think, needs to be redefined. I'm not quite sure that they've got there yet. I like Jeff Dodds, the new CEO there, and I think he's going in the right direction, but I'm not quite sure that they've landed upon exactly what the second generation role of Formula E is. Having the proof of concept that electric racing work, that's done, right? The racing in Formula E is great. It's now moving it on to the next phase of really establishing a fan base around it. We did some unbelievably inventive things there. When I started, this was still the Bernie Ecclestone era of Formula One, so there was nothing in the way of social. So we had an enormous opportunity, which we took to redefine the way in which motorsport was done in terms of fan interaction, short form video, and social videos, and that way of harnessing engagement. And I was enormously flattered when Liberty took over and they finally took the brakes off of what Formula One was doing. Initially, they were copying what we did in Formula E. I mean, they've gone off in a completely different and massive direction since. But the blueprint that they initially started on was very similar to what we were doing, which was enormously flattering. And like you say, with the cameras, there was a load of other things in terms of race coverage, the on-screen graphics, because Formula E was a place, and still is a place, for experimentation, where it was very rare that the answer to anything was no. The answer might be why, and that might lead to a no, but it was never just no. And that was a very inspiring workplace to be in. Well, obviously, I wanted to take the race to the level of success that I believe that we can do. We're in 4 different languages now. We launched 2 new ones this year, Arabic and Italian. There's a couple more that I would like to go into. There are a few more extensions of the brand that I genuinely believe that we can make work, and there's a whole host of scale that we can still add to the business to really underscore its position as the primary leader in the market now. Certainly, if you look at video and podcasting, we're the biggest player in the English language now, which is an enormously enormous achievement in 5 years, and something that I sometimes have to pinch myself when I look at the figures, just to believe that we're doing as well as we really are. But I think we've only really scratched the surface of the ultimate potential of what we can do with that, and I want to see that through. Outside of that, though, I think this has probably been my last job in the world of motorsport. I'd have been, more than 25 years, nudging on 30 years. I don't have any desire to work for a team again or to work for a rights holder or anything. Once I've taken the race as far as I can, maybe I'll go and sit on a rocking chair by the beach somewhere and think about all the amazing things I did, slightly wistfully. So I think obviously we saw McLaren perform incredibly strongly in the Australian Grand Prix, and they've clearly got a very good car. And in Norris and Piastri, they've got a pair of excellent drivers. I don't know when this podcast will go out, but we're recording it ahead of the Chinese Grand Prix weekend. I suspect that we'll see a much stronger performance from Ferrari this weekend, and hopefully, we've seen that Red Bull and Mercedes are competitive too, and we'll have a season-long battle between the four different manufacturers, and it could be an all-time classic season. I don't think that the performance that we saw from McLaren is necessarily quite as dominant as it might have looked. The Melbourne track has a habit of inflating certain characteristics of cars, and that's not necessarily going to be repeated, but we'll see. But I'm really feeling quite optimistic that we're going to have a cracking season. As an independent journalist, it's been a long time since I've had any favourites. But when I was a sort of 7, 8 year old growing up, one of the first I remember I had a Panini sticker book, and there was a guy in there who just won his first race, and that was Nelson Piquet. And I was a new fan then, and he was a new winner, and so he became my sort of favourite driver when I was 6, 7 year old, and I supported him all the way through his battles with Mansell and Senna and all of that. Now, some of his political views might not necessarily align with mine, but when you're 8 years old, that's not really what matters. What matters is what they do on track. And as a kid, he was very much my favourite. Well, I think the main thing is, like, there's a lot of people trying to do it now. There's never been more opportunity and ability to get involved. But the clear thing is to try and think, what are you bringing to it? There's an enormous amount of noise, and you've got to try and cut through. And in order to do that, you have to find your own voice. You have to find what's your secret sauce that you're bringing to the party. Just emulating what other people are doing isn't a way to cut through. But there will be something in the way that you perceive things, and something in the way that you want to do it that is different. And then finding that and doubling down on it will be the path to success. So I think there is a time and a place, right? But it has to be on like an American style pizza. It has to be on a deep pan thing, right? You cannot put pineapple on an Italian style thin crust authentic pizza. It's got to be on some American style deep dish thing with a real doughy bread. Then it works. On an Italian thing, no, leave it alone. There you go. There you go. No, I would really have loved the ability to have had a sit down, proper conversation with Ayrton Senna. He died before I was anywhere close to being in the industry. He was a fascinating character, a very deep thinker on these things, had some really interesting opinions on stuff, and I would have really loved the opportunity to have had a 20-minute one-to-one, or ideally more than that. I mean, if we could get him on a podcast like this, how fascinating would that be? And yeah, that will always be my answer to that question. Well, I was lucky enough to speak to Sir Sterling many times. I had a few incredible conversations with him, and one really, really interesting dealing. So probably it's got to be 10 or 15 years ago, Danica Patrick put her NASCAR on pole position for their Daytona 500. And I got a phone call at the office when I was at Autosport at the time from Sir Sterling asking how he could watch the Daytona 500. And it took a couple of phone calls, but I managed to get him a subscription to Premier Sports so that he was able to watch the race. It's one of those random things that's happened to me over the time. Yeah, my favourite track to visit is Macau, where the Macau Grand Prix takes place at the end of each year. It's an unbelievable track. It's a street track that's really tight and narrow, but it's also incredibly fast in places. Only you have to be good to be fast at Macau. Nobody who's quick at Macau isn't any good, right? It's the best of the best excel there, and I absolutely love that. It's a crying shame that we don't have a sort of open Formula 3 class anymore that can race there, but I think the organisers are doing quite a good job with Formula 4 and regional stuff, and I'm hoping I get the opportunity to go back there in the not too distant future. It's been quite a few years since I've been now, and I can't wait to go back. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there's quite a lot. There's quite a lot of things, but I guess the thing that really winds me up, and you see it particularly on social media now, is the really lazy allegations of British bias. Right? You say that Nando Norris does a good race. It's like you're only saying that because he's British. It's like, no, we said Max Verstappen's done some great races. You don't say we got Dutch bias then. I mean, look at my surname, right? My family is Dutch. I'm not a flag waving, GB news watching Uber patriot. We just call it as we see it. But the second that you say something against people that they don't like, oh, you're just saying that because you're British, and it drives me insane. And if I could take anything out of motorsport, it'd be anybody who makes any accusations British bias is like blocked from watching the rest of the season until they grow up and then come back later. It's just the lowest form of debate. It really is. So, so I'm cheating ever so slightly on this, as you will hear on the avoid question at the end. But I spent the time when I was a correspondent was in the early 2000s. There were a few drivers I got on very well with. So the taxi and the dinner could be interchangeable, but we'll do it the way that I'm going to do it. So the taxi, I would like Sebastian Vettel to drive me to the track. I first met him when he was 15 and was dominating Formula BMW, and we always got on very well. I find him, and I'm a very engaging character and a real fun guy to be with, and I think over the course of that taxi drive, we would have a good laugh. Dinner, slightly longer, so maybe a slightly more serious conversation. I always really enjoyed the company of Robert Kubica, and I could easily spend a whole dinner talking to him. On the avoid, she's not a driver, but she is part of the paddock. Danica Patrick. I've got no time for conspiracy theorists, so I would quite happily avoid any contact with her. There's nothing. Well, I mean, it is personal, clearly. Yeah, this is an unbelievably hard question. I know. I don't really know how to answer this. So I've just go for my favourite sandwich, which is ham and cheese on sourdough with mustard. I haven't got any justification for any of this. I can't even think of an amusing name for it. But that's what if I have to go into a sandwich shop and I'm ordering something, that's what I'm having. So why I might as well be the embodiment of the sandwich that I would choose. I'd like to do some sort of funny BLT thing. I'm not. No, I don't think so. Really, I would say I'm probably better at ice skating than you imagine I would be. I had, when I was a kid, I, I I think my dad wanted to be out the house, or me and my mum and my sister out the house, and we used to go for ice skating lessons on a Saturday morning, and so I can actually ice skate quite well. I haven't done it for a little while. Occasionally, when in the winter when they put up the temporary things, I'll go on and just make sure I can still go around and whatever. I'm a better ice skater than you might imagine. I've been fortunate enough to do scores of fantastic interviews with some amazing people, and it's really hard to pick. But I've decided that to talk about a time when I caught up with a guy called Tiago Montero. In Formula One terms, famous for being the other driver on the podium at that Indy race where there were only six starters. But this was much more to do with a horrific crash he'd had while a touring car driver um, for Honda in the World Touring Cars, and basically his retinas had detached at the force of the accident, and um, he found himself in a really horrible situation. And we sat down for uh, best part of an hour, going through the details of um, the crash that he's had, the impact of it, and the road to recovery that went through. He was incredibly candid, and it resulted in a really excellent piece. And it was nice to. I mean, I don't think anyone had properly sat down and spoken to him about it. Because it's quite hard to ask people about that, but he was in the mood to discuss it, and it was one of the most revealing and engaging interviews I've done. Yeah, so I'll go with that. Yeah. So first guess, I'm going for Jim Clark. Obviously a legendary racing driver, but someone whose voice you hardly ever hear. There are staggeringly few recorded interviews, audio interviews with Jim Clark, or TV interviews with him. So all the stuff you ever hear really is written. So it's very hard to get the measure of someone purely from a written piece. So I'd love to invite him there. And for the other two, I've gone for a sort of double act, and you've mentioned him already, and that's Mario Andretti and AJ Foyt, like probably the two greatest rivals in American motor racing for more than half a decade. They don't really particularly like each other, but if they could just hold it together over the course of this dinner, I think the fireworks would be amazing, the stories would be fantastic, and whether or not I'd be able to repeat much of it is another matter. But I would be having an amazing time. It's gonna be an interesting dinner, that's for sure. Oh, thank you very much. I've had a lot of fun, and yeah, I wish you all the best of success with this show.